that. We do ask that you complete a very brief survey that you'll receive after the webinar. Your feedback is really important to us, both to help inform our future activities and also to show our funder that we have people participating and they like to see how the response is. So you'll receive a link to that survey via email following the webinar. We are also recording this webinar, just so you know, and we'll post it to our website after the webinar. Okay, and so I'm going to turn it over to our presenters today. I believe Amy Banko will be starting, and so I'll turn it over to you, Amy.
Thank you, Anne. I want to thank all of the SHP faculty, staff, and students for joining us today. Brittany, Giovanna, and I have developed today's session to meet the needs of returning faculty, students, and staff, as well as those that are joining us for the first time today. We'll be providing a review of content from last week's session with some new areas to highlight. Once again, building resiliency is on our menu. When we look at disaster mental health counseling, you help people build resiliency by providing education on trauma responses, defining what a crisis or disaster is, by building coping skills and encouraging connection. Next slide. So, update from last week, 1 week ago from our last session, and the majority of people are reporting that this is still very hard. And we want to know, for people that are rejoining us today, how has your experiences shifted in the past week? What has been hard for you? For people joining us for the first time, share with us as well in the chat box. When we chat with our coworkers, our colleagues, our students, we hear again that we're still faced with disruption to life, to our routine as the SHP community. As instructors, we are interrupted in how we teach and instruct. For students, the way that you learn is disrupted or interrupted. And as SHP community as a whole, we are disrupted in how we congregate or don't congregate as a community. We still have an abundance of uncertainty, right? How long will COVID-19 impact our community? How long will social distancing last? What will fall semester look like? We still have this unprecedented health crisis with this novel virus that has a wide range of symptoms, and we feel concerned for our safety, for our loved one's safety, and potentially being exposed and getting a wide range of symptoms or severity of illness. And we're still doing our best to juggle various roles when we have these reduced boundaries and overlap of our work roles, our school roles, our personal life. I know me personally, I'm wearing a hat today as faculty. I'll be wearing a hat later today as a student in my PhD program. I'll be wearing a hat as a 5th grade teacher to my son, and I'll have to take out my parenting hat as well because that kid is getting sassy, right? So what are some of the challenges that you've had in this past week? Challenges and the way that we respond to trauma, to crises shift. But I think what's most important is that as we're experiencing this and we're getting these different challenges and these different barriers, we want to emphasize and stress in today's training that we can build skills and tools to reduce our distress, that sense of empowerment, that we can influence this together, working together. And so as we are thinking about these challenges, what also comes to mind are the words in which we use to describe this experience. We hear these euphemisms like living a new normal, navigating a different landscape, transitioning to the changes or adjusting to the changes, and all of these euphemisms, next slide, are alluding to what we're experiencing, and it's diminishing that experience, because our new reality is that we're doing our best to live through a protracted natural disaster. And we said last week, a disaster follows a crisis or emergency when people have a disruption in meeting their basic survival needs. There's serious and immediate threat to human life and well-being. Disasters cause trauma and increase stress. They are a time when people are overwhelmed, when they struggle to function within their normal coping skills. If you'd like, share with us, how has giving a better name and definition to this crisis shifted your experience or changed your experience of it? I mentioned that this is a protracted disaster. Well, what does that mean, right? Disasters are phasic. Disasters occur in 5 phases. The first phase being the impact phase, when the disaster itself strikes. And then the recovery phase, where we see communities coming together to rebuild and heal. The impact phase of a disaster is typically 0 to 48 hours. We are on day 44 of this particular week with New Jersey's lockdown, and we don't have a date of reopening in sight. So we're all in this very protracted impact phase that brings about a lot of uncertainty. So we are all experiencing disaster trauma, which has adverse impact on our psychological functioning, our overall wellness. The reality is, no one who experiences a disaster is untouched by it. Giving accurate names and verbiage to our experience is important, but our main point of last week and this week is to empower you. We want everyone to know there are things you can do to build resiliency, to ensure that you come out on the other side of this crisis well and whole and able to move forward. The first part to building resiliency is to develop understanding and knowledge, right? That psychoeducation. And the second part is building up new tools and skills. So let's review quickly the common reactions to disaster so that we can go to the part of building additional skills. Next slide. Last week we noted one normal response to this abnormal event are the reactions, the emotional reactions that we experience. Intense emotions are energy depleting. I think that's why my son as a toddler took many naps. He had very strong emotions when he was a toddler, right? So when we are experiencing intense emotions, our energy is diverted. And some of our most precious resources, our time and our energy, are just depleted by trying to manage these intense emotions. These reactions run the spectrum of the full emotion range, from numb and apathetic to grief, shame, and guilt. Do any of these emotions resonate with you this week? If you like, you can share in the chat box some of the emotions that you've been processing. Many times people are unaware of the triggering factors or the antecedent to feeling these emotions, not realizing that it's related to the crisis of COVID-19. Last week, we noted that you can assess your emotional distress using SUDS, these subjective units of distress measure, right? And practice self-compassion by reminding yourself the reason for these emotions is a traumatic stress or distress related to COVID-19. So Brittany, Giovanna, and I want to check in with you guys there. How'd you do in using the SUDS? Did you use it? Did you use it to assess these emotional reactions? And you can also share with us if you were able to practice some of the techniques to reduce emotional distress. Next slide. The next domain of a reaction to trauma and disaster is physical reactions. Traumatic stress can present physically and is correlated with our hyperarousal. Our body is such a good gauge of our stress level. Your body will really take the brunt sometimes of that traumatic stress. Physical reactions of traumatic stress are directly related to our nervous system and how it operates in crisis. When we're under traumatic stress, we're flooded with 3 stress hormones: adrenaline, cortisol, and norepinephrine, and they regulate our metabolic process. So these things that you see here, increased heart rate, increased breathing rate, increased blood pressure, even increased calories that we burn, which sounds like a benefit, right? This increased metabolism could be a good thing, but it actually results in increased appetite and cause cravings for sweets, for high-fat foods, for salty foods. I definitely have become better acquainted with my fridge during this crisis. I know Brittany had shared with me that she's baking up a storm. And so again, these are these physical reactions. Additionally, you may be having trouble sleeping. Issues with falling asleep is sleep onset insomnia. Difficulty staying asleep is sleep maintenance insomnia. And if you're lucky like me, you experience a mixture of both depending on the night. Sleep onset insomnia is correlated to hyperarousal, while sleep maintenance insomnia is linked with some of those more emotional reactions related to depression, sadness, and grief and guilt. Insomnia that's correlated to an event is transit insomnia, and it should go away once the stressor is gone. But since the stressor, this crisis, is going to be present for some foreseeable time, Giovanna and Brittany and I are urging you to use the skills that you're learning throughout our series to reduce hyperarousal and bring the body's relaxation response on to help initiate and maintain your sleep. So if you feel like, in your chat box, let us know, did you use any tools from last week to reduce your physical reactions? Or anyone joining us for the first time today, have you observed any of these physical reactions? Next slide. The third domain, when we look at traumatic stress, is cognition. We emphasized last week that stress and cognition are intertwined. When we experience stress and traumatic stress, we're in a state of hyperarousal and we have less mental energy and less mental flexibility. All of our cognitive efforts can at times be focused on the stressor, the crisis, because we are looking at how to survive and how to manage, and thus our cognitive functioning is blunted. So let's check in again this week and let us know in the chat box, are you experiencing these things? In the last week, have you said to yourself that, or have you observed that you're reading the same page or reading the same sentence over and over again with diminished comprehension? Are you having difficulty composing emails, writing papers, drafting compositions, difficulty remembering things, completing things, taking longer to complete tasks, reduced sense of creativity, difficulty concentrating during conversations? I am always saying, you know, what were you saying? Can you repeat that? You need a lot of physical energy to do cognitive work. Disruptions to cognition can significantly impact our sense of success and satisfaction with our work and school goals. And they can make us feel insecure or vulnerable in our abilities to function as a student or as an employee. So we're going to be going over again some techniques to reduce these cognitive reactions. And if you'd like, you can share with us from last week in the chat box if you used any techniques to reduce those cognitive disruptions. And the last domain of reactions is the interpersonal reactions. Next slide. Social distancing has greatly impacted our ability to connect and to benefit from our social capital or our social network. Further compounding this issue is how our relationships and connections can be deterred by these normal interpersonal reactions to disaster and trauma. Be mindful and take inventory of how are you engaging or not engaging with your friends and family. So if you can, if you were attending for a second time this week, let us know if you were able to engage differently in your relationships, if you were able to take some of Brittany's suggestions and connect a little more. Thank you for sharing. As mentioned before, connection is key to the recovery phase of disaster. If we think about disasters that have occurred historically in our town or country, you'll observe people coming together in a sense of unity and solidarity to support recovery efforts and to collectively heal. And recovery and healing at SHP is two-pronged. Next slide. Because here at Rutgers SHP, we are the helpers. We are healthcare providers and assistants, lab technicians, clinicians, counselors who are called to the forefront of this COVID-19 crisis as first and second responders. We are all working together for the recovery efforts for friends and family, neighbors, community, and our state as a whole. But we also need to give time and attention to our own care and healing. Last week, we made an analogy. We put our own oxygen mask on first to help others. As helpers, we need to focus on our self-care because supporting others through crisis can lead to something like vicarious trauma. Vicarious trauma is an occupational challenge for people working in fields where you're helping others going through trauma. Last week, we introduced SUDS to assess general distress. This week, we're offering you the professional quality of life scale to assess vicarious trauma, compassion fatigue, and burnout. Next slide. You'll get this in your handouts. Here is a brief sample of the protocol. It basically has, statements that you will answer on a Likert scale for those 3 domains of compassion, satisfaction, burnout, and secondary trauma. You'll get a score of those 3 domains of low, high, or average. This tool can be helpful in assessing your wellness as you continue to help others during the COVID-19 crisis. Scoring high on these things may be an indicator that you need to incorporate more wellness skills into your routine, or if you haven't already, reached out and speak to someone regarding your own wellness needs. Giovanna is now going to review for us what happens in our brain when we're experiencing traumatic stress so that Brittany can talk about how to counteract it.
Sorry, I forgot to unmute myself. Thanks, Amy, and welcome. So last week, we learned about the impact of this experience on our brain, but it's important to review this material again. One of the main functions of our body is to keep us alive. In order to keep us protected, our body has certain automatic reflexes that turn on when we feel threatened. These automatic reflexes come from our nervous system and brain. Today, we will briefly learn about how these automatic reflexes protect us and affect us, not just physically, but emotionally and cognitively as well. Next slide. So, at a biological level, we're created to survive. Survival mode is a fear-based response to threat and stress. COVID-19 is a major threat to all our lives and has caused an upheaval to our entire way of living, to our work, home, socialization, shopping, school, running errands, and many other things. Really, it's an entire shift to the whole world, which feels overwhelming and frightening at times. This makes our body automatically respond to this threat and puts our body into survival mode. In this mode, we may feel many things Amy described. We'll have emotional reactions, physical reactions, interpersonal issues, and cognitive problems. What I do want to say is that these are all normal reactions to threat, and they are happening in our brains and nervous system. They are working hard at keeping us alive. Next slide. So there are 3 parts to our brain. There's the reptilian brain, or the brainstem, which is located at the base of our brain, over here. And then we also have a limbic brain, or sometimes people refer to that as the limbic system. And we have a neocortex, or also known as the prefrontal cortex. So I'm going to touch on those really quickly. So the reptilian brain, this is the part of the brain that reacts quickly and automatically to danger, kind of like a lizard running and darting away from possibly getting eaten by something. We too have this quick reaction built in to protect us from danger, like moving our hand quickly away from a hot stove, reacting quickly to a garden hose that for a quick second appeared to be a dangerous snake. If something is interpreted by our brain as dangerous, we automatically react. This is not a conscious decision, but rather a biological one that protects our survival. So with the limbic system, or the limbic brain, sometimes it's referred to as the mammalian brain. This brain we share with other mammals, like cats, dogs, monkeys. This part of the brain is responsible for our feelings and emotions. This is where we feel fear, happiness, anger, and many other basic emotions that we share with other mammals. The limbic brain and the brain stem, they actually work together to keep us alive, and they respond to traumatic events. This is actually where our alarm system is located, and it's called the amygdala. It's very sensitive and to picking up danger in our environment, and immediately sets off an alarm that coordinates many parts of our body to act. And then we have the neocortex, or some people call it the prefrontal cortex. This is the area of the brain that makes us special and human. It's kind of like the front part of our brain. This is the part of the brain that's responsible for like thinking, rationalizing, reasoning, organizing, our imagination, language, abstract thinking, and so many other things that make us uniquely human. The really fascinating aspect of this part of the brain is in its relationship to trauma and our COVID-19 experiences. So our brain actually shuts off. This part of the brain shuts off as soon as the amygdala turns on. So when we're feeling scared or anxious and the amygdala sounds the alarm, the neocortex, that human part of our brain, it stops working. So this is why it's so hard for many of us to think during this crisis. It's difficult to make decisions, it's difficult to concentrate, to organize our thoughts, and so many other things that we take for granted. Next slide. So how does our brain and body respond to threat? So our brain is designed to protect us from danger. So what makes that alarm, also known as the amygdala, goes off? So what makes it go off? It is normally something in our environment that triggers us. So we see something, we hear something, smell something, like maybe fire, feel something, maybe a bug crawling on us, and automatically we react to avoid getting bitten, or even taste something like rotten fruit, and we automatically react, spit it out so that we don't get sick from it, food poisoning. These are automatic reflexes that protect our body. So as soon as our brain picks up something threatening in our environment, the alarm goes off, that amygdala. This is not something we choose, but rather something that happens automatically to help us survive. So when this automatic response happens in our body, we actually can feel it. So you'll notice that your heart starts to increase, maybe your breathing will change. Either you'll be holding your breath or you'll be breathing faster. You might start sweating. Your muscles might start to tense up or tighten, and you may even feel butterflies in your stomach. When you feel these things, we know that we're feeling threatened or frightened by something in our environment. So how is our brain and body reacting to COVID-19? So at this current time, we're constantly bombarded with COVID-19 related stuff. We're seeing and hearing it on the news, reading about it on social media. There's breaking news, death reports. It's all over Facebook and Instagram. Family, friends, neighbors are talking about it. So it's really difficult to avoid. We also have triggers in our environment, like seeing people wearing masks, gloves. We're keeping social distancing. We're afraid to touch someone or something in our environment. Just hearing an ambulance can trigger a fear response that is connected to COVID-19. I encourage you to take a look at and identify your triggers so you can begin to manage them better. Our bodies are constantly picking up on all these small cues that may seem insignificant, but these cues are telling our bodies that danger exists and it's reacting, which is putting us all in a chronic state of survival mode. Next slide. So how does trauma impact our nervous system? So the reptilian brain and the limbic system, or the limbic brain, works automatically together to keep us alive. But there's another system that they alert to help us to react. This is called the autonomic nervous system. This system also runs automatically without our control. It regulates our heartbeat, blood pressure, digestion, and does so many other things to keep our body alive and running smoothly. Interestingly, there's two parts to this system. There's the sympathetic nervous system and the parasympathetic nervous system. They actually work together. To easily explain this, let's think of them like pedals on a car. So the sympathetic nervous system, that's our gas pedal. And the parasympathetic nervous system, that's our brake. So if we're driving down a highway and we're pressing the gas, maybe pressing the gas a little too much, speeding, and we notice ahead that there's an accident. What do we want to do to get into control? We're going to press the brake. We want to slow down. So again, our gas pedal, which makes us go, is the sympathetic, and our body's brake is the parasympathetic. This is important to understand if we want to better control them. So the sympathetic nervous system is responsible for fight and flight. It's what makes our heart race and our muscles tense, ready to run for our lives or fight off an attacker. So when we're feeling fearful, anxious, or our heart is racing, butterflies in our stomach, or any other uncomfortable reaction, we know that the sympathetic nervous system is turned on and in charge. Normally, what we want is homeostasis or balance, and to feel in control of our body. We want to know that we can put on that brake and turn that parasympathetic nervous system on. So when the parasympathetic nervous system is turned on, we feel more in control. We can think more clearly, and we feel more social. Actually, being social can help to turn this system on. Again, we learned many things last week. We learned breathing exercises, mindfulness, like looking at the 5 senses, but there's other resources that we can use and practices. So this week, we're going to learn about progressive relaxation, which relaxes tense muscles, and also guided imagery, which can help turn that parasympathetic nervous system on and make us feel more in control of our emotions and physical reactions. We will learn these things later in this webinar. Next slide. So again, COVID-19 has put us into survival mode. So fight, flight, or freeze, or fawn, or faint mode. So fight mode is which is our automatic response to physically attack or confront aggressively. So COVID-19 is difficult to physically fight since it's this invisible threat. But for some of us, we may act out aggressively with others. It is our nervous system feeling under this threat and automatically responds to stimuli. So we may get easily frustrated, easily irritated more often, and blow up on our family and friends. This is because our sympathetic nervous system is actually turned on and in that fight mode. There's also flight mode, which is when we like run or flee. This is probably not accessible to our sympathetic nervous system around COVID-19 crisis, because at times we might actually feel trapped because we have to stay at home due to social distancing restrictions. This is where we see people go into fight mode. So an example of this is people organizing protests and fighting the threat they feel has been imposed on them because they feel trapped and they can't act. So their action actually happens when they're organizing these protests. There's also a couple of other more passive responses when we can't access fight or flight. And some of us probably feel these reactions. There's freeze mode when you feel paralyzed or like you can't move at all. There's fawn mode when you just more likely to comply and hide. And then there's faint when you actually lose consciousness. Next slide. So why is it so difficult to think during this time? Again, when the sympathetic nervous system is turned on, our prefrontal cortex, the front part of our brain that makes us human, it's no longer connected and doesn't work very well. So that part of the brain, we need to turn it on in order to think clearly, reason, and make good judgments. What we really need to do to help ourselves to think better is to turn the parasympathetic nervous system on. This is what will make us feel relaxed, more in control, and will help us to concentrate and think clearly. In a little bit, Amy and I are going to provide you with ways to turn the parasympathetic nervous system on so you feel more relaxed and in control of your emotions, reactions, and thoughts. But right now, Brittany is going to address some strategies to further help you with your thinking, concentration, and axing that prefrontal cortex. Next slide, Brittany.
Thank you. So on this very full slide, and don't worry, you will get this emailed to you as a handout. This lists some of the common executive functions, which is really just a fancy umbrella term for your cognitive processes, things that your brain is responsible for. And as Amy and Giovanna discussed, when we're in the state of heightened stress and hyperarousal, that part of our brain is shut off and these things become even harder to do. So, you know, if we're forgetting things, if we're having difficulty planning, making decisions, if we're having difficulty inhibiting those automatic responses like grabbing our cell phone and scrolling instead of focusing on the thing that we need to do, you know, to get our work done or our schoolwork done. If we're having those memory difficulties, that's what's going on. It's these executive functions that are being, and again, you can see it live. I'm having trouble finding words too. So these things cause trouble with a whole host of different things, and things that we need for the type of work we do, or to be good students, to keep our households running. So you can see down the left column, it's the executive functions. Moving over one, it's examples of some of the things that you might be having trouble with. What are the functional implications of these executive functioning issues? And then there's some support strategies and personal strategies. So support strategies might be things that you can put in place as either a formalized accommodation, or you can pull on your social circle to kind of help you with. The personal strategies are habits or compensatory things that you might be able to do and to implement in order to mitigate some of the difficulty that you're having. You, of course, want to pair these things with activities to activate your parasympathetic nervous system, which we're going to be getting into. So I just want to walk you through some of these things quickly. If you want more information about this, please reach out. Let us know. We can do a workshop just on some of these compensatory strategies, either for you or for your students. So reasoning, for example, being able to identify solutions to problems, completing assignments, doing work that's creative. So if you're trying to write a manuscript or an essay or speak in a webinar, for example, test taking might be something else that you're struggling with. Ask for opportunity for draft feedback if you're a student, or partner with your colleagues to say, can you read this, or can we talk through this? You might need some assistance with course selection, with registration, with managing financial aid, even requesting models or samples of certain work or assignments. If somebody else you know has submitted a grant, maybe reading through their grant to see what pieces you need in place. And then some personal strategies. Making pros and cons lists, having it black and white, having that evidence in front of you, pulling in other people so that you don't have that decision fatigue, using office hours, partnering with colleagues on different types of projects, like these webinars, for example, being able to work with Amy and Giovanna. The three of us are able to support each other in the cognitive work that it takes to put something together. Being able to talk through problems out loud rather than just relying on your internal dialogue, being able to seek out that feedback. And then there are models that you could use, like the wise choice decision-making model. And I do have a little YouTube video linked that explains that model, but there are templates where you can actually write things out. And for some of us, going through that process, that step-by-step process, can be really assistive so that we're making good decisions and not impulse decisions. So again, if you want more information on that, please reach out and let us know. And you'll get this handout emailed to you. Next slide, please. So now we're going to move into talking about ways to activate our parasympathetic nervous system and elicit the relaxation response. Before we do that, though, I want to reintroduce you to the SUDS. Next slide, please. So this is the subjective units of distress. And it's a really simple self-assessment so that you can start to gauge where you are on this scale. And when we're introducing new techniques, and most of us are used to being in this academic environment, so we like assessment, we like measures, we want you to take a look at this and think about where you currently are. And then once you're starting to implement some of these strategies, we're going to have you look at it again. And you can see what's working for you or what's not working. It's all trial and error. Everyone is unique, and different strategies are going to work for different people. So by implementing something like this, you're really able to get a sense of what's working for you. Additionally, this can be used then in conversations that you might have with providers. If you notice that your SUDS is creeping up and staying up above 6, you might want to reach out and speak to a provider, speak to a professional, pull on your support system and say, this is what I've noticed. It can really help for those kinds of conversations. It can also help to alert you to what some of your triggers are. Are there things that are really driving up your distress? Having this measure, we're then better able to plan and to target. So for a lot of us, this might be the first time that we're experiencing some of these symptoms of anxiety and depression, heightened panic. For other people who have a history of anxiety, depression, or other mental health conditions, we might be seeing a worsening in symptoms or higher SUD scores now. So go ahead and take a look at this. It's a 0 to 10 measure. 0 is peace and complete calm. And 10 is unbearably upset to the point that you cannot function. And when we're hitting those numbers, and even prior to that, that's when we really want to be able to reach out to our supports, to professionals. And at the end, we do have some crisis and suicide lines. So go ahead and take a look before we move into some of the support strategies. All right, next slide, please. So the first thing that we're going to talk about is the role of social connection. In part 1, I discussed the role that this plays in our mental health and recovery literature. In the context of trauma and PTSD, social support is a really critical component, showing that it's a protective factor for PTSD. It also aids in that recovery process. In our last session, we talked about how do we maintain that social engagement and social connection while social distancing. So if you've done anything in the past week, enter it in the chat box. Let us know what's worked for you or what strategies you've tried. But today I want to explore how we can use our existing social relationships to help cultivate ways to address physical and emotional needs in healthy ways. During these times of high stress, it's really easy to pull on unhealthy coping strategies. And we're having those interpersonal issues that Amy and Giovanna discussed. And I saw in the chat, some of you were mentioning that you might be kind of snapping at people or having some strain on some interpersonal relationships. This is really easy when we're all operating from this place of hyperarousal. So here are some basic questions that you can use to check in with your support systems, whether it's people that you live with or, just other supports that you're staying connected to. So we want to ask people, what are you feeling? What's going on? If somebody snaps at us, it's really easy to then be able to snap back. But are we able to take a breath? Are we able to say, what do you feel? What's going on? Are you seeing somebody, their jaw clenched or their shoulders up around their ears? Those are some physical signs. Asking, what do you need? Right? Sometimes we're quick to give advice or to try to solve a problem, but asking, what do you need? And how can we work together so that we can meet that need in a healthy way? So do you need me to listen? Do you need me to get involved? Do you need me to give advice or support? Having those open conversations, we're then able to meet each other's needs in healthy ways and strengthen our relationships. When our partner or friend, they do open to us, or if someone does come to us, we also want to use that as an opportunity to honor that, to be thankful for that and express gratitude. Thank you for coming to me. Thank you for having this conversation with me. Establishing that practice of routinely expressing gratitude to the people that are in our lives can then foster kind of chain reactions of increased positive feelings, reciprocal acts of kindness, and that can strengthen our social bonds as well. Taking that moment to say, thank you for mowing the lawn, or, thank you for getting up at night with the child that woke up for the 5th time. Thank you for cleaning the bathroom. Thank you for disinfecting all of the groceries after braving going out into the world. Those small acts of kindness and those small words of gratitude can really be powerful to strengthen those connections and to transform our lives in so many other ways. Next slide, please. So that leads us to gratitude. There have been numerous studies that show that a daily practice of gratitude can have a powerful impact on our mental and physical health. Research has found that gratitude was a protective factor for individuals who witnessed the 9/11 attacks, and combat veterans who reported higher levels of gratitude experienced lower rates of PTSD. Researchers have also demonstrated that practicing gratitude daily can do things for our physical health, like lower our blood pressure, lower levels of stress hormone cortisol, and can create stronger immune system responses. They're not 100% sure why this works, but it's thought to happen because of the focus on positive emotions. That appreciation helps to activate the parasympathetic nervous system, which then counters that fight or flight, those stress responses that Giovanna discussed, which is responsible for increasing our heart rate, blood pressure, respiration, and all of those things that Amy covered at the top of the session. So here are some strategies to be able to build gratitude into your day-to-day. Journaling is a really easy way to do it. You can either use, a blank journal or something like, I have this 1-minute gratitude journal that gives you daily prompts. Using those prompts, which is on the list too, there's linked, it's 100 different gratitude prompts. It asks, list 3 people in your life you're thankful for, or 3 things in nature that you're thankful for. That can really help you just as a super simple way to start to incorporate gratitude. Using a gratitude jar. This is one of the things that I've really wanted to try with my kids and in my home. So you can get any type of jar, an empty jam jar, just something that's going to be fairly large. You can decorate it. You can have your kids decorate it. If you're artsy, you can do it. Have it look visually nice. Put it somewhere where everybody can see it or where you're going to see it on a regular basis. And then throughout the day, when you encounter things, that make you smile or that you're thankful for. And it doesn't have to be big things. Don't be picky. That's the thing. It doesn't have to be these big, huge things. We want to look for those small things and take time to appreciate it. Write that down, put that in the jar. As you watch the jar fill, it can again just remind you of all of the positive things that we do have. And you can go back and then be able to read those things. There are also gratitude trees or gratitude gardens where you can create flowers. Around Thanksgiving, we usually do a gratitude tree where I have my kids go collect sticks from the yard and we make cutout leaves. You could write things on that and have that displayed. Since it's spring, a gratitude garden might be nice for you're making paper flowers. Taking a gratitude walk. And this can pair the grounding technique that Amy did last week with some physical exercise. So as you're walking, as you're out in nature, what are you observing around you? Do you feel the way that the sunshine is warming your skin? Do you feel the cool breeze? Do you smell the flowers? Try not to focus on your eyes itching or the sneezing that the pollen's causing. So doing those gratitude walks and get the people around you involved in it too. Can you discuss these things before, after a meal, or before bed at night? In fact, a few studies have found that people who express gratitude before bed have more restorative and longer sleep. So how can you build these things into your routine? How can you make it part of your day? Finding something to be grateful for, even in the midst of a pandemic, can aid in preventing that prolonged stress reaction. So I know that it's not always easy to keep up that mental state of being thankful and appreciative, but we can start small, try to notice those simple things. We also want to start noticing what our thought patterns are, especially the automatic thoughts that creep in, right? Do we tend to kind of go negative? What do those things start to tell us? What's our internal dialogue? Next slide, please. So as we've been talking, we know that our brains have a really powerful impact on our body. The way that we process information, interpret stimuli, produce reactions, and generate thoughts. These thoughts are shaped and conditioned by our past experiences, our perspectives on life, our emotional state, and the people around us. Who again, the people in our lives, the people around us are also experiencing all of these things. And maybe in different, in their own unique and different ways, which could be triggering to us too. When all of us are in this state, it can be really challenging. So the thoughts that we have and how we talk to ourselves frames how we look at life. It frames how we act, and it frames how we interact with others. And unfortunately, our inner dialogue, that inner monologue, is often negative, especially in times of high stress. So think about it. How many of us will ruminate on one small misstep? I know I'm going to go back after this webinar and say, oh my goodness, I forgot my words when I was talking about compensatory strategies and executive functioning. Or how many of us are going to be really harsh judges of our own performance? When in fact, those are the things we would never really say to a friend, right? We would be able to provide reassurance. We would be able to highlight our friend or our family member's strengths. But many of us tend to dwell on that negative. So we want to start to develop an awareness of our self-talk and how it impacts our mental state. When feelings of stress and panic and anxiety start to creep in, it's almost like looking through a dirty window, right? It distorts what's really in front of us. It distorts our reality. Listening to that negative self-talk spinning through our head can increase anxiety and depressed mood. So the first thing that we want to do to start to correct this is just to take notice, to listen to ourselves. What are we saying? Are we allowing our self-talk to dictate our mood? Or are we able to breathe and get into a state of calmness and have gratitude? For most of us, it's probably the former, but we can develop skills to get us closer to the latter, right? When that negative self-talk then goes unchecked, it can start leading into patterns of thinking called cognitive distortions. Now, for a lot of us, hearing like that we have cognitive distortions can be kind of upsetting, but what these really are, these are just subtle biased thoughts and beliefs that we've reinforced over time. Cognitive distortions, an interesting thing to know is that these are positively linked to symptoms of depression. So when we're having a lot of cognitive distortions, we might also be having a lot of symptoms of depression. And what are cognitive distortions? So there's a number of these. Typically about 10, and if you want more information, we can provide that. Overgeneralization is one of them, and this is when a person is coming to a conclusion based on a single piece of evidence or a single piece of information. So I bombed the interview, that means I suck at interviewing and I'm never getting a job. So the first statement is kind of one of those examples. Being stuck at home is awful, right? It's just, that is showing us that like polarized. It's one thing or another. There's no shades of gray. So that's another type of cognitive distortion. I'm either perfect or I'm a failure. Once we're able to start recognizing these things, we then have an opportunity to choose how we look at the situation, right? So we can look at it differently. We can challenge some of these. We can think about evidence that we have for it or evidence to refute it, and then be able to reframe the self-talk and the thoughts that we're having. If we do have evidence for it, we can use growth mindset to develop a plan to change it. Okay, I'm still learning. You know, if I'm not good at this now, I'm still learning. I can come up with a different strategy. We can be a little gentler with ourselves and those around us. We can maybe even think about approaching the challenges with gratitude. So my professor tore up my paper. Well, does the professor know that you want to go into a doctoral program? Then maybe that professor was just being overly generous with their feedback and their time. So how can we reframe it? That they want to make us better, right? So this isn't to say that you should never complain. It just shouldn't be the only way that we're approaching life or that we're looking at things. We want to be aware of these habitual patterns of thinking that aren't helpful to us or that might be impacting our own mental health and wellness. Being able to reframe these things, recognize them, take skill and practice. So be patient with yourselves. It's not something that's going to happen overnight. And again, this is a very, very quick overview of what these things are. So if you want more information, again, let us know and we can build another session around this, or we can email you with some things. So we would be happy to do that. Now we're going to move into doing some relaxation exercises. So again, think about the SUDS, think about where you start. We're going to move into these activities and then we're going to reassess. Next slide, please.
So one tool we can use is called muscle relaxation. Well, it's actually progressive muscle relaxation. It's an exercise that reduces anxiety and stress in our body by having you slowly tense and then relax each muscle. Remember, when we are in fight or flight, our muscles tense up without even noticing it. Progressive muscle relaxation helps us to turn the parasympathetic nervous system on, which is our brake system, and makes us feel more in control. This exercise is great to practice frequently and can provide immediate feelings of relaxation and help us gain control. During this exercise, each muscle should be tensed, but not to the point of strain. If you have any injuries or pain, you can skip the affected areas. Pay special attention to the feelings of releasing tension in each muscle and the resulting feeling of relaxation. So let's begin. Sit back in a comfortable position, and you can shut your eyes if you feel comfortable doing so. And you can play some of that relaxing music that's attached to the slide. Okay, so let's begin by taking a deep breath and noticing the feeling of air filling your lungs. Hold your breath for a few seconds. Release the breath slowly through your mouth like you're blowing out of a straw, and let the tension leave your body. Now, even slower, take another breath. Fill your lungs and hold the air. Slowly release the breath and imagine the feeling of tension leaving your body. Now, move your attention to your feet. Begin to tense your feet by curling your toes and the arch of your foot. Hold on to the tension and notice what it feels like. So we're gonna hold it for 5 seconds. Release the tension in your foot. Notice the new feeling of relaxation. Next, begin to focus on your lower leg. Tense the muscles in your calves. Hold them tightly together and pay attention to the feeling of tension in your lower calves. Let's hold that for 5 seconds. Now release the tension from your lower legs. Again, notice the feeling of relaxation. Remember to continue taking deep breaths and slow breaths out. Next, tense the muscles of your upper leg and pelvis. You can do this by tightly squeezing your thighs together. Make sure you feel tenseness without the point of strain. Let's hold that for 5 seconds. And release. Feel the tension leave your muscles. So let's now begin to tense your stomach and chest. You can do this by sucking the air into your stomach and holding it in. Now squeeze and hold that tension a little harder. We're gonna hold it a little bit longer. Now release the tension and allow your body to go limp. Let yourself notice the feelings of relaxation. Next, we're gonna hold our arms out in front of us with our hands stretched out. Now you're gonna tense your arms and your hands, so tense down. Make a fist and squeeze all the way up your arm and hold it. And you can scrub your shoulders also. Hold for 5 seconds. Now release the tension from your arms and shoulders. Notice the feelings of relaxation in your fingers, your hands, your arms, and your shoulders. Notice how your arms feel limp and at ease. Let's move up to our neck and our head. So we're gonna actually tense our face and our neck by distorting the muscles around your eyes and mouth. So it's just kind of like an angry face. So you're gonna tense your muscles in your face. And then release the tension. Again, notice the new feeling of relaxation. Finally, let's tense our entire body. So tense your feet, your legs, your stomach, chest, arms, head, and neck. Now tense harder, but without straining, and hold that tension. Now release. Allow your whole body to go limp. Pay attention to the feeling of relaxation and how different it is feeling from the feeling of tension. So notice your body now. How does it feel? And you can turn off the music. So notice how your body feels now. Does it feel more relaxed? How does your breathing feel? How about your heartbeat? Do you notice anything else? And you can put it in the chat. Amy is now going to introduce us to another exercise that induces the relaxation response.
We have a guided imagery exercise plan, but we are just about out of time. So I'm going to briefly describe what guided imagery is, and then I'm going to provide with the MHTTC the script that I would have been using with you guys. You can also find guided imagery, meditation, on various apps that we provide in our resources. So guided imagery is essentially a visual meditation that incorporates your senses. It asks you to utilize your imagination, your thoughts, your senses to help focus on a place that is all of your own. It helps to create harmony between the mind and body and encourage peace and calm. And there's been a lot of research on guided imagery. It is very effective in reducing things like stress, blood pressure, respiratory rate, even cholesterol. It can heighten short-term immune cell activity and speed up healing. Guided imagery has been shown to lower anxiety and pain. And regular use of guided imagery can heighten access to emotional stability, humor, responsiveness to music, spirituality, creativity, and abstract thinking. So I will send out that link or the script that you can use at your own pace and own time, as well as we'll highlight some of the apps that also have guided imagery. And this will help you to, again, bring on that relaxation response. So now we're going to move into SUDS.
So now that we've had time to do the progressive relaxation activity, I want you to take another look at SUDS. Has it changed from when we first started? And this is something that, again, whenever you're trying things, it might work, it might not work for you. Do this prior, do it again after. See which things are able to change your score to bring those units of distress down. And as I mentioned, if you notice that your scores are not coming down, if they continue to increase, there's a crisis text line. You can text home to 741-741 and be connected immediately with a crisis counselor. There's also the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline. That number is listed here. That is available in both Spanish and English and is 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. But definitely seek help from a professional if your scores are not going down or not reducing. We want to be mindful of our wellness and our mental health, as well as those in our lives. So pass these resources along. And if you would like any additional information, don't hesitate to reach out to us. There are a number of resources in the slides following. Some are the same from last week's. There's also been a number of new ones added. So go ahead and check those out. It might be things that you want to bookmark, and have on hand. There's a number of gratitude resources. There are compensatory strategies. There are resources to meet basic needs, student loans, financial issues, food scarcity. Explore them. Let us know if you have questions about them. We'd be glad to provide more information for you on any of the things that we've talked about today. Please let us know how we could be helpful to you or to your students, and we would be glad to put together some additional content. Thank you all so much for staying on with us. We really appreciate you being here and the work that you're doing.
And thank you to our presenters, Amy Banko, Brittany Stone, and Giovanna Giacobbe. We appreciate your information today. And again, to all the faculty, staff, and students who joined us, we really appreciate your time. We want you to be well, take care of yourself. And as Brittany said, please let anyone in the Department of Psychiatric Rehabilitation know if there's additional support we can provide you. Thank you and take good care of yourself. Have a good day.